April 1966. The Beatles vanish from the stage and retreat behind locked studio doors. In the next 220 hours, everything changes. Alliances shift, rivalries heat up, and engineers invent tools on the fly. Revolver was not just an album. It was the product of a creative lab where every rule got bent or broken, and the band's balance of power would never be the same. The question is, how did four friends nearly implode to remake pop music forever? Studio 2 at Abbey Road became the Beatles' world from April 6th to June 22nd, 1966. The group clocked in over 220 hours across those spring and early summer weeks, nearly 3 times the hours spent on Rubber Soul just months before. Freed from the grind of live shows, the band no longer had to race through takes or squeeze creativity into short, late-night sessions. Instead, they found themselves with open-ended time, sometimes working until dawn, sometimes returning for days to tweak a single sound. The session logs, meticulously kept by EMI staff and later analysed by Mark Lewison, show the band's commitment. Day after day, the same 4 names, the same engineers, the same studio, but never the same approach. This surplus of hours wasn't just a luxury, it changed everything about how the Beatles worked. With the clock less of an enemy, John, Paul, George and Ringo could push each song further, try out half-formed ideas or abandon them completely and start again. The pace slowed, but the ambitions grew. No pre-written roadmaps, no demos to follow. Most songs were built from scratch, right there in the room. The band's relationships shifted too, as long nights and endless takes tested patience and sparked new alliances. The freedom of time would open the door to risk, invention, and sometimes confrontation. For the first time, the studio became a space where anything could happen, and where the old rules, even between friends, could be rewritten. Abbey Road's technical staff found themselves in uncharted territory as the Beatles' demands grew more ambitious. In April 1966, Ken Townsend responded to John Lennon's impatience with double tracking by inventing automatic double tracking, ADT. Using 2 linked tape machines, Townsend created a system that could instantly duplicate a vocal with a slight delay, saving Lennon from the tedium of singing the same line twice. The invention, completed over a few nights between April 20th and 25th, quickly became a studio staple, not just for the Beatles, but for countless artists who followed. Geoff Emerick, newly promoted to chief engineer, took risks that would have rattled Abbey Road's old guard. He placed microphones just inches from Ringo Starr's bass drum, stuffing the drum with cloth to tighten the sound, and running the signal through a Fairchild limiter. This close miking, first used during the May sessions for Paperback Writer and Rain, gave Ringo's kit a punch and clarity unheard of in pop music at the time. EMI management balked at the idea, but the results spoke for themselves, and soon every studio wanted that sound. The band's appetite for new textures led to more experiments. Vocals run through a Leslie speaker created swirling effects, tape machines operated at different speeds for vari-speed tricks, and homemade tape loops were stretched across mic stands and down corridors. On Tomorrow Never Knows, engineers juggled as many as 8 loops at once, riding the faders like musicians. The tools born in these sessions, ADT, close miking, vari-speed, and tape manipulation, became the building blocks for the album's most striking moments, changing the sound of recorded music forever. On April 6, 1966, John Lennon arrived at Abbey Road with a song that barely resembled pop music as anyone knew it. The song Tomorrow Never Knows began with a single droning chord and lyrics lifted from Timothy Leary's psychedelic manual. Lennon wanted his voice to sound, in his words, like the Dalai Lama chanting from a mountaintop. Engineer Geoff Emerick and technician Ken Townsend responded with pure invention. Lennon's vocal was piped through a Leslie speaker, spinning the sound into a swirling, otherworldly wash. But that was only the beginning. The Beatles brought in homemade tape loops, strips of quarter-inch tape loaded with laughter, reversed guitar, sitar drones, and even Paul's sped-up voice squawking like a seagull. Emmerich, Phil MacDonald, and the rest of the technical crew ran these loops live, draping them across mic stands and threading them through tape machines, riding the faders like musicians themselves. The control room became a tangle of tape, pencils, and frantic hands, with Lennon grinning at the chaos he had set loose. While Lennon pushed for sonic revolution, George Harrison was fighting for space of his own. Taxman, his sharp-edged protest against Britain's tax rates, opened the album, a rare feat for a Harrison song. He insisted on the first slot, determined not to be sidelined. In Love You Too, recorded with Indian musician Anil Bhagwat on tabla and a sitar part Harrison had labored over for months, he found a new voice, blending Indian classical improvisation with the Beatles' pop instincts. These tracks did not just sound new, they signaled a shift in who got heard and how. Lennon's experiments and Harrison's assertiveness made it clear Abbey Road had become a laboratory, and every Beatle was fighting for a say in what came out of it. Paul McCartney's drive for precision shaped some of Revolver's most striking moments. On April 28th, the studio filled not with guitars or drums, but with the sharp, close sound of a string octet. For Eleanor Rigby, McCartney and producer George Martin left the rest of the band in the control room, bringing in 8 classical musicians to play a score Martin had arranged from Paul's melodic ideas. The other Beatles did not appear on the track at all. According to session logs and later interviews, Paul worked closely with Martin, requesting the strings be recorded with microphones placed unusually close to the instruments, a technique borrowed from film scores, not pop records. The result was a biting, almost percussive attack that startled the session players and gave the song its stark, cinematic edge. McCartney's willingness to bypass the usual band dynamic was clear. He wanted the sound in his head, and he was prepared to use outsiders to get it. A few weeks later, on May 16th, that same approach surfaced again. On For No One, Paul asked for a French horn solo, not a standard choice for rock music. Alan Seville, principal horn player for the Philharmonia Orchestra, arrived at Abbey Road expecting a routine session, only to find McCartney humming an intricate, winding melody. Seville later recalled the challenge of hitting a high note that pushed the instrument to its limits, yet he delivered a solo that perfectly captured the song's melancholy. Paul's exacting standards and Martin's classical expertise turned a simple ballad into something quietly radical. These sessions showed McCartney's growing confidence in taking control, using the studio and outside talent to serve the music, even if it meant leaving his bandmates on the sidelines. Inside Abbey Road, the old pecking order began to fray. Paul's perfectionism drove him to take charge of arrangements and to push for take after take until he heard what he wanted. John, once the band's dominant force, drifted between bursts of wild creativity and stretches of detachment, sometimes vanishing into the corner with a paperback or arriving late after long nights. Ringo, always steady, found his role shifting as engineers like Geoff Emerick started shaping his drum sound more than he did himself. Emerick later wrote that tension simmered just beneath the camaraderie. Paul's drive could wear on John, while George, quietly frustrated, watched the others fight for space. The old balance of power was giving way to a new map drawn by whoever had the strongest idea or the loudest voice on any given night. Every session became a negotiation, and every song a test of who would lead and who would follow. Inside the control room, the balance of power shifted. Engineers like Geoff Emerick and Ken Townsend stepped out of the shadows, making decisions that shaped every second of tape. When arguments broke out between the band, it was often Emerick or producer George Martin who decided which take to keep, which experiment to chase, or when to call it a night. Emerick later described his role as part referee, part translator, fielding Paul's relentless ideas, John's unpredictable moods, and George's quiet insistence. Disputes over sounds or arrangements sometimes stalled progress until Martin or Emmerich made the final call. Townsend's technical fixes, like automatic double tracking, did not just save time. They gave the engineers new authority, letting them solve problems that even the band could not. As sessions grew more complex, the control room became the real engine of Revolver. The Beatles might have sparked the ideas, but it was the engineers and Martin who turned chaos into music, often deciding whose vision would reach the final record. Every innovation and rivalry in those Abbey Road sessions reshaped how artists approach the studio. Even now, bands cite Revolver's restless spirit as their benchmark. The Beatles proved that collaboration and tension can coexist, fueling creativity that still echoes across music today. Genius isn't harmony, it's friction, and what survives it.